Everyone resents Hindi for reasons which are non-existent.
Mhm.
Hindi has no hegemony in this country, but it
Right.
is resented. So it is
Mhm.
a failed, it's a SaaS, but a SaaS without any control. The
Mhm.
Hindi that's spoken in Mumbai is very
Yes.
different from the
Yes.
Hindi that's spoken in Delhi. The
Mhm.
trouble is that Hindi walas want to do two things at the same time. They want
Mhm.
Hindi to be pure,
Mhm.
and they want Hindi to then be accepted by everyone. Both these things
Right.
simply cannot happen together.
Right.
Go to a Hindi speaker in Delhi, you would not find, I mean, you can't catch them dead reading a Hindi newspaper.
Mhm.
There's no Hindi newspaper in their house. There is no Hindi book on their shelf.
Mhm.
And they will feel awkward and embarrassed about speaking Hindi.
Is it possible to relegate English to a secondary spot given how it is the language of international exchanges?
I oppose English not because it's a colonial language. I oppose it because it's a feudal language. In
Right.
India, it's a language of inequality. It's a
Mhm.
language and the dominance of English ensures that the child of an Indian English-speaking elite, mediocre and dud as he might be, would
Mhm.
end up in a fairly high and respectable position because speaking English is passport to everything in this country.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Deshkaal. We have with us Yogendra Yadav ji, and today we are going to go back to a discussion that we've had before and that is very much in the national news on languages, specifically the language policy, three language policy that has been stirring up political storms. Yukendraji, you have written about a very interesting thing in this time's column, how the Hindi policy that has been followed in India has failed us. If we could begin by talking about that a little bit.
Uh, Thanks, Paramita. I should begin by clarifying that I speak here and I write as a Hindi wala. I write in Hindi. That still is my first language. And when I write in English, I mostly think in Hindi and translate that into English. And I speak as someone who loves Hindi, just as any Tamil would love Tamil. I'm sure you love Bengali. So what when I say that Hindi uh, Rajbhasha policy has failed, I do not say that with any enmity or any sense of unease with Hindi as a language. But I say this simply because the consensus that was arrived at toward in the freedom struggle appears to have broken down. The consensus during the freedom struggle was that Hindustani, as it was then called, which included Urdu, uh, could be a useful way of connecting various languages and communities of this country. And this was advocated primarily by those who were non Hindi speakers, Mahatma Gandhi being one of them. However, over the years, all kinds of things have happened. There has been a differentiation of Hindi and Urdu, a
Mhm.
very artificial
Right.
differentiation.
Mhm.
There has been also on the part of governments, various policies which have ensured that the distance between Hindi and other languages has kind of increased at the official level. Um, and in that context, and the fact is that English has continued as a de
Mhm.
facto official language of this country.
Mhm.
Hegemony of English has continued in a way which was not anticipated, which was not desired, but it has continued. In that context, this Hindi as the Raj Bhasha of this country has now become a completely counterproductive policy. It doesn't serve Hindi, it doesn't serve India. Why do we have it then? So that's why I say just abolish this. Hindi doesn't need Rajbhasha. As a Hindi wala, I think Rajbhasha status for Hindi hasn't achieved very much. Just to use a very desi metaphor, all it has achieved is it has made Hindi into a failed SaaS of all other languages. Everyone
Yes.
resents Hindi.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, everyone resents Hindi for reasons which are non-existent.
Mhm.
Hindi has no hegemony in this country, but it
Right.
is resented. So it is a failed, it's a SaaS, but a SaaS without any control, which can only generate resentment and
Mhm.
quarrel. And it has become a Sautelima for
Right.
all its own languages, for
Mhm.
the at least 3 dozen languages that Hindi encompasses.
Right.
which could well have become separate languages if they had state
Mhm.
support.
Mhm.
Hindi has become a sautelima for that.
Right.
And should we not have a fresh think about it and
Mhm.
say, okay, we don't need this Rajbhasha business.
Right.
Hindi has expanded over the years
Mhm.
in some ways, and Hindi has shrunk in some ways.
Right.
It has expanded thanks to Mumbai cinema,
Mhm.
thanks to cricket commentary, and thanks
Right.
to TV series.
Mhm.
These are the most powerful carriers of Hindi language. They
Right.
have,
Right.
and this has happened voluntarily. People,
Mhm.
uh, imbibe it in the way they wish to, and that's
Mhm.
perfectly all right. We all the Sarkari committees put together have not done 1/100th of what these three other things have achieved.
Mhm.
So why get into this imposition? And instead, why not focus on uh, state promotion for all languages of our union, at least to begin with 22 scheduled
Mhm.
languages,
Mhm.
and then at least 100 non-scheduled languages. That's what we should be focusing on.
Right.
And as far as Hindi is concerned, I think we would be doing much better service if we simply strengthen this language rather than try and teach it
Mhm.
to others.
You have an interesting suggestion that moves away from the oppositional stance to Hindi, by opening it up, making it Lok Bhasha. And one of the things that you wrote about in the column was about how the insistence on purity is turning people off. So, in order to make it a Lok Bhasha, and like you were just talking about, instead of insisting that we keep out Urdu from it, how can we make it into a language for all people? If What would your
Yeah.
thoughts be on that?
Exactly. You see, if Hindi has to be a linked language, and
Mhm.
incidentally, there is nothing official called linked language, but if Hindi does serve,
Mm.
if people are, even in Bangalore streets, now I hear people speak Hindi
Mhm.
instead of Kannada. Now, whether that's
Right.
a good thing or bad, that's a different matter.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if Hindi has to serve as this kind of a linked language,
Mhm.
this Hindi cannot then be a language of purist grammarians. you know the
Mhm.
trouble is that Hindi walas want to do two things at the same time. They want
Mhm.
Hindi to be pure,
Mhm.
and they want Hindi to then be accepted by everyone. Both these things
Right.
simply cannot happen together.
Right.
Hindi has to be spoken in multiple registers. It is spoken. The
Mhm.
Hindi that's spoken in Mumbai is very
Yes.
different from the
Yes.
Hindi that's spoken in Delhi. And the
Mhm.
Hindi that's spoken in Patna is very different from the Hindi
Mhm.
here.
Mhm.
And if you go to Hyderabad, you would begin to wonder if you're hearing the same language or is it a
Mhm.
different language that you're hearing. This
Right.
is exactly what Hindi has been like.
Mhm.
And this is what, so multiple registers of Hindi must be permitted.
Mhm.
The artificial language that is being coined by the Rajbhasha Samitis and
Right.
by translators and grammarians
Mhm.
is not a very helpful language.
Mhm.
Having said this, I just want to caution about one thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes when we say Hindi should be simple, uh, that I don't fully understand, because we don't want English to be simple. We use a word like hierarchy very
Mhm.
simply. Educated people speak these words
Mhm.
because somehow English is the language of those who can understand, who can debate, who can get into nuance. And the
Right.
moment someone from Hindi area, in
Mhm.
order to cultivate a discussion in Hindi, the moment they use a slightly more difficult word that you cannot
Mhm.
use for your taxi driver,
Mhm.
English walas come and say, "Oh my God, make Hindi simple." So I don't quite agree to this demand of making Hindi rudimentary
Right. Right.
while keeping English fairly sophisticated. Any
Mhm.
language which is used for intellectual discussion will have a vocabulary beyond 400 words,
Right.
which is what we should encourage.
Mhm.
But yes, we must have Hindi spoken in multiple registers.
Mhm.
And any attempt to resist that is going to be of disadvantage. And the finest of things is not just for ordinary communication.
Right.
Some of the finest poetry in Hindi has
Yes.
drawn upon different languages. Some of
Mhm.
the finest writers of Hindi.
Mhm.
Prabhat Joshi was my favorite uh,
Mhm.
journalist writer,
Mhm.
or say someone like Bhavani Prasad Mishra. Both of them drew upon Malavi, a certain region of Madhya
Right.
Pradesh.
Right.
Phanishwar Nath Renu, my favorite Hindi
Mhm.
fiction writer,
Mhm.
he drew so much upon Maithili and Nepali.
Mhm.
Um, Mukti Bodh, the finest Hindi poet, drew
Mhm.
upon Marathi because
Right.
he's actually originally Marathi speaker. This
Mhm.
is how Hindi has been. This is the strength of Hindi. And let's just let that be. And that's what makes Hindi into a lok bhasha.
Mhm. You know, this disconnect of the common people from Hindi, where do you see it stemming from? And one of the things, for instance, now it's very much in vogue to have micro cuisines. You know, we go to the region, we break it down into smaller things. And like you're saying with language, that is entirely possible, but we're not looking at it in that sense. These influences in literature or in our cultural life.
So the people who have unease with Hindi fall in three different categories. One, there are non-Hindi walas who have unease when, as and when they face some bit of imposition. When someone tells me, no, no, you have to read it. I won't understand Bengali, but you need to understand Hindi. Obviously, you'd resent it.
Hmm.
So I understand that bit of resentment. That comes only for those who enter the official formal sectors. Those who do not enter it are happy to adopt it. They're happy to use it because there's no grammarian to tell them that they are wrong. The second category is of those who are Hindi speakers, who live in the Hindi states, whose home language, in a sense, is Hindi. But those who belong to what we call the middle class, something that I keep insisting is in the middle of nowhere. It's a name of Indian ruling elite for itself. That ruling elite's unease with Hindi, although they are in the Hindi region and although their mother tongue, in a sense, is Hindi, that is a plain colonial product. This We still have a slavish mentality, we have a colonial mentality,
Hmm.
and especially among the Hindi walas, which is more than you would see among other languages. You can go to a Bengali household in Calcutta, and you would expect Desh, you would expect Anand Bazar Patrika there. Go to a
Absolutely.
Malayali house, they would know some of the best
Yes.
Malayali poets.
Hmm.
Go to a house in Pune,
Hmm.
they would have Marathi books on their shelf.
Hmm.
But go to a Hindi speaker in Delhi, you would not find, I mean, you can't catch them dead reading a Hindi newspaper.
Hmm.
There's no Hindi newspaper in their house. There is no Hindi book on their shelf.
Hmm.
And they will feel awkward and embarrassed about speaking Hindi.
Hmm.
Now, that's straight, plain colonial this thing. You have to read Fanon to understand this phenomenon.
Hmm. Hmm.
The third is the unease, which is understated, which should be stated more often than it is the unease of the dialect speakers. Now, I use the
Right.
word dialect very
Hmm.
carefully and within quotes because,
Hmm.
as you know, the difference between dialect and language is only this: that a
Yeah.
dialect which has a army and a state
Hmm.
is a
Hmm.
language. So
Hmm.
these 25, 35 languages could well have been languages.
Right.
Marwadi, why is Marwadi not a language? Why
Hmm.
is Bagri not a language?
Hmm.
Maithili is recognized, but what about Maghai? What about Magadhi? What
Right.
about Bhojpuri?
Hmm.
Bhojpuri could be bigger than many international languages, actually.
Yes.
So that unease is an unease of those who find that their officially declared mother tongue is different from their real mother tongue.
Right. Right.
This I've experienced as a child. I grew up in
Hmm.
a place in Rajasthan where half the town spoke Bagri, which is a dialect of Hindi.
Hmm. Hmm.
You would find if you may navigate in Delhi, but if you go to that town, you'd be a little hard to understand what they are saying.
Hmm.
The other half of the town spoke Punjabi. Both of them understood each other perfectly.
Right.
Officially, it was a Hindi state. Officially, all of us went to a Hindi medium school.
Hmm.
And there were only probably 5 or 10 families in that town, mine included, which actually spoke the Akashvani Doordarshan Hindi at home, which is what I did.
Hmm.
So when I go to school, I have a very artificial advantage because
Hmm.
my mother tongue, and in my case, literally my mother tongue, because my mother came from Allahabad. So
Okay.
my mother tongue happens
Hmm.
to match the language of the
Hmm.
textbooks.
Hmm.
And all these children who are being told that they're studying in their mother tongue, it's actually not their mother tongue.
That's
Someone
very
coming from
interesting.
Bagri and the other person coming from Punjabi. This is not their mother tongue.
Right.
So they have a linguistic distance to cover, which I
Hmm.
did not have to.
Right.
So that's a resentment which is not expressed as often as it should be, not
Hmm.
acknowledged as much as it
Right.
should be.
Right.
And pedagogic wisdom from all over the world
Hmm.
points in this direction that the language of school, especially the language of primary school,
Hmm.
should be as close to your mother tongue or your home language as
Right.
possible.
Right.
In
Right.
our case, in the Hindi
Hmm.
speaking states, that is
Hmm.
not the case.
Yeah.
And the difficulty then is when someone from Bihar comes to Delhi,
Hmm.
someone tells me, Are, tumhe Hindi bolni nahi aati? Because Bihari,
Hmm.
Bhojpuri, just like Bengali, does not
Right.
recognize gender distinction.
Right.
गाड़ी चल रही है, डब्बा खड़ा है. It's very hard for any outsider to
Absolutely.
understand. Why is the what is the logic behind that?
Yes. Yes.
Bhojpuris don't recognize because the language doesn't have that distinction.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now you can come to Delhi and say, "Look, my mother tongue doesn't have it. What can I do? I
Hmm.
don't
Hmm.
understand your gender distinction."
Right.
A Bhojpuri would find it hard to say that because of his
He comes under
official.
the umbrella
He
category.
cannot say that my mother tongue doesn't, because he's told that your mother tongue is Hindi.
Right. Right.
So he's told that he cannot speak his own language. Which is, and this
Absolutely.
applies to anyone who comes from Bihar. They're
Ah.
constantly told, you don't know Hindi. तुम हिंदी वाले कैसे हो? तुम तो हिंदी नहीं जानते.
Hmm.
And what he cannot say is that, look, you have made Khadi Boli into Hindi. I'm
Right.
not from a Khadi Boli Pradesh. I'm
Ah.
from a different area.
Correct.
You're imposing certain version, which is almost exactly what happens to Bengali. Bengali of Calcutta and regions
Right.
around that,
Absolutely
South,
different
is turned
from what
into
we
a
call
different.
Mofusshol. Right.
That's right. And if you speak Rajbangshis, Kamtapuri,
Right. Right.
let alone Sylheti and other things, these are very different
Yeah.
languages. So in Hindi, because the area covered is so large,
Mm-hmm.
the distance is so much that if someone who comes from, let's say, Bhagalpur
Right.
and comes to my village,
Mm-hmm.
they would actually find it hard to understand each other, although both of them are from Hindi speaking states.
Mm-hmm.
Such is the distance between. So, somewhat similar to the distance that you have between Sylheti Bengali and
Right.
Bengali spoken in
Right.
Midnapur or so on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of difference that we are dealing with. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what leads to unease. But we
Right.
need to address these. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying, in order to address these real questions,
Mm-hmm.
can we please stop this Rajbhasha nonsense? This is a false crown put on Hindi's
Mm-hmm.
head. A language that, and then the trouble is that when someone from Tamil Nadu says Hindi hegemony, I
Right.
cannot accept. I mean, I can either cry or laugh because we live in a country where
Right.
children are penalized for speaking Hindi in schools. You
Mm-hmm.
know, what kind of linguistic hegemony are we talking about? The hegemony is English.
Mm-hmm.
And the trouble is, no one wants to discuss the most evident
Right.
thing
I was just going
around.
to come to that. Politics has not addressed this gap, and what you suggest is very interesting. Taking all the languages in the eighth schedule and making them Raj Bhashas. So, do you ever see this oppositional stance going away from our language discourse? Because I think that holds back a lot of discussions where we could come to a common forum.
That's precisely why my suggestion, because I
Hmm.
want that oppositional stance to go.
Right.
And I draw this from U.R. Anantamurthy, one of my favorite writers. He said Bhashas versus English. That's the real thing in this
Right.
country. And I want all the Bhashas to stand together
Hmm.
against English imposition. Once again, I have no problem with English, and anyone whose mother tongue is English is absolutely entitled to studying in English in this country, should be
Right.
entitled. But this imposition of English, which is, as I keep saying, it's a pedagogic barbarity. Nothing in the world justifies this.
Mhm.
But not just that, it's a serious impediment to creativity. Generations after generations of Indians, probably including people like me, have
Mhm.
spent half their energy in getting their English right instead of actually thinking. Now you have a generation of Indians who actually can write somewhat creatively in English and can actually use a language because you unless you can make a language stand on its head and dance, you don't know the language. And in that sense, I still believe I don't know English. I can speak to you, I'm communicating. It would be possible. But if I were to play around with language, I
Mhm.
can't play around with this language because it's not mine.
Mhm.
It's not something that I learned as a child. So I now find some English writers, some
Mhm.
people who write in English.
Right.
who actually, Amitabh Ghosh being one of them, one of my most
Mhm, mhm,
top favorites,
mhm.
who actually can, who are not constrained by English as a language, and who can actually express Indian reality and reality of other places
Right. Right.
as if they were using their, as if this was their first language.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh, in the past, in the previous generations, I thought half of them were struggling to establish that they knew English
Right.
and trying to
I
borrow
agree.
metaphors from a culture to which they don't belong.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
we all, I mean, I knew American universities had a fall semester.
Hmm.
And I was always intrigued. What is
Right.
this fall semester? Then someone said it's
Hmm.
about the fall, when leaves fall. All right, leaves fall all the time. What's so special about the fall? It's only when I went there, I mean, I was almost 40-year-old, I saw it. And then I said, okay, this is fall.
Hmm. Hmm.
Unless you live in that culture, unless
Right.
you are part of it.
Hmm.
So English, the hegemony of English has very seriously constrained our
Consequences.
creativity.
Mhm, mhm.
That's why I
I have
oppose it.
two questions here. One um, is to do with whether, if we look at English without an oppositional stance as something that we need to conquer and master and be good at, do you see that thing going away? This supremacy of English going away? And the second, is it possible to relegate English to a secondary spot, given how it is the language of international exchanges, even though Hindi is the fourth largest language in the world? So,
We Indians have weird ways of thinking about this question because we're so colonized. A Japanese would never say
right.
that. They were not colonized. A Japanese would say, yeah, English is very useful, extremely useful. Let's learn it.
Right.
No Japanese would say, let's junk Japanese and start learning English. You know,
Mm,
uh, for the last 10 years or so, in Britain, they have now realized that Mandarin is going to be language of
right.
the future.
Yeah. Mm,
In English schools, now they're teaching Mandarin, but I
mm,
do not know of a single English school which has stopped teaching English and
mm,
has switched
mm,
to Mandarin.
mm, mm.
The trouble is that we frame this question in a strange
Yes,
way.
it's, huh.
English is useful. English must be taught. I don't think you need to learn it from class one, but since
Mm.
there is such a craze in this country, and if you
Yes.
don't teach, people
Mm,
would somehow believe that you're not teaching their kids anything. All
mm.
right, teach them from class one, just for emotional satisfaction.
Right.
You know, so I'm not at all opposed to that. I actually want every Indian child to have one Western language. And because of our history, English comes close to us. And English has much larger footprint than Spanish or French or German. So why not use it to our advantage? Of course, English should be taught. My problem is when we think that teaching English
Mm,
should mean relegating our own languages to a secondary
mhm.
status. My problem is when we think that children should be taught geography, history, and mathematics and science in English language, where mostly even the teacher does not know English language. That is why I say it's
That is true.
barbarity of the worst
Absolutely.
kind.
Mm,
And that how can a civilized country, how can how can 10 sane people sit and discuss this thing as a serious question?
mm,
So yes, English uh, should be taught with greater proficiency, and given the kind of premium that we have put on English language, I'd much rather than that be shared equally. Then everyone
mhm,
should have it.
mhm.
Tomorrow if Japanese becomes the language of the world, well, everyone should learn it and use
Mm,
it. That's okay.
mm, mm,
But the problem is the way we think about this question.
mm.
That's something that I object to. Would English go away? Unlikely, because there's so much going for English. There is an English imperialism that we are
Right.
dealing with,
Right.
imperialism of the English
Mhm,
language,
mhm.
which is partly supported by the fact that there's a global economy. But please remember, 87% Indians do not ever travel outside their own district in this country. Let's not forget that all these global jobs and interactions and so on and so forth is confined to probably 2 to 3% of Indian population. Why punish this fellow who's living in Orissa, is going to at the most go to Bhubaneswar, maybe will visit Gaya or Kolkata once in life. Why punish that person by,
mm,
forcing English language on that person? Those are things we need to just think about as a country.
mm,
Unfortunately, I don't think sanity would return very easily because this is insanity backed by large structures. We
mhm,
speak of the industrial, of the military industrial empire.
mhm,
The empire of English is stronger than the military industrial empire. It's
mm,
an empire that's encoded in economy, an
mm,
empire that's encoded in mass media,
mm,
its power,
mm,
and which is also encoded in structures of power at every single place. So, as Ramano Lohia used to say, he was, of course, much more strongly anti-English than I am. But he used to say that uh, I oppose English not because it's a colonial language. I oppose it because it's a feudal language. In
right.
India, it's a language of inequality.
Mhm,
It's a
mhm,
language and the dominance of English ensures that the child of an Indian English-speaking elite, mediocre and dud as he might be, would
mhm,
end up in a fairly high and respectable position because speaking English is passport to everything in this country.
mm, mm,
So it's a feudal character. It's the inequality and built
right,
into it.
right.
That is what needs to be questioned.
I'm going to end with on the note of language chauvinism, but I wanted to tell you a story. So recently, I was taking my child to a birthday party where I see one of the younger kids whose mother always talks about how her daughter isn't proficient in English. But I was very pleased to see the child comes and all the friends are playing and speaking in English, and she comes and tells her mother, "Mama, इनको तो हिंदी अच्छी तरह से नहीं आती है देखो अंग्रेजी में सिर्फ बात कर रहे हैं." And I was remembering your column then. What would it take for us to get over that chauvinism, that I know English and give Bhashas the respect that it deserves?
It's a much larger question of our overcoming colonialism. you
Right.
know, what Ashish Nandi calls it the intimate enemy that
Yeah.
resides within
Yeah.
us. And to be able, colonialism has, I mean, not only economically
Mhm.
damaged us, not only politically ruled us, its deep cultural impact is something
Mhm.
that we need to come to terms with. And you do not come to terms to it by hating English language or by
Mhm.
discarding the books in English language in your library. That's a
Mhm.
stupid way of dealing with it. But we as a civilization have to come to terms with our colonial past. Um, 15th August 1947, we attained political independence. But in many ways, we became even more complacent about our cultural slavery. And my own understanding is that it is that vacuum, that cultural vacuousness, which informs the right wing and the left wing, the liberal and the conservative. Everyone is
Mhm.
informed by
Mhm.
this. That is what creates a vacuum in which anyone who speaks of Bharat Mata looks like, the nationalist guy. Anyone who speaks about Rashtra ka Samman, Sabhyata, they look like people who somehow invoke self-respect. How do we connect to our self-respect, genuine self-respect, without being idiotic? That's a real colonial curse. So let me also end on a story, on the note of a story. This
Mhm.
is a story told to me by my teacher who was traveling in Rajdhani.
Mhm.
He also encountered another couple where they are not that comfortable with English language,
Mhm.
but they're very, very keen that their child learns English. And they see this professor who's clearly, comfortable in English and speaking to others in English. The child happens to drop something. The father asks the child to come. Say, idhar aao, child. Bolo sorry. Uncle ko bolo sorry. The child says sorry. The father says, acha, bolo, oh shit. The child says, oh shit. This is both comic and isn't it also so tragic?
Right.
That's the problem. That's something
Mhm.
that we need to.
Thank you so much for yet another very interesting conversation. Thank you, and we'll meet again next week. Thanks.